So let me tell you what we are going to do tonight. Well, for the last 2 weeks, we've been working with cover stitch and chain, and we've been doing a lot of hemming. And if you don't have cover stitch and chain, you don't have that option for hemming. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at hemming with the serger. And one of my very favorite ways of hemming with the serger is actually to attach bands. It's quick, it's fast, it's easy, and you know I like that kind of thing. So let me just show you some things I've got that have got bands on. This t-shirt is a great example. Do you see how I put bands on the sleeves? That meant I didn't have to hem them. I just sewed a band onto the end of the sleeve. And actually on this t-shirt, I have a band around the bottom. Just looking for my black and white one, which I can't see at the moment. But this is a really great idea to put a band on the bottom of your t-shirt if you don't have cover and chain. And even if you do, because look, see it, the nice contrast, it kind of just adds more fun to your t-shirt. So even if you have cover stitch and chain, it may be an option you like. Now, the one time when you can't put a band around the bottom is when you have a curved hem. And I'm moving because I'm going to show you my t-shirt, which I have on, which is actually the Seattle tee, and you'll see that it has a very curved hem. Now that absolutely would not take a band, okay? It would need to be a fitted band, and I'm not dealing with that. I'm talking just about bands. So if you have a curved lower edge to your t-shirt, it's not going to work for you. Another time I use them, and this is actually quite a good tip, I think, is on the bottom of leggings. Do you see that's actually a band? Now some people fold it up and do a cover stitch chain, a cover stitch hem, and that works too. But I also do find people say that their stitches pop when they use the cover stitch hem, and that's probably because it goes on over a bit of trauma fitting it over your foot. So I think sometimes that if it's very tight, it will pop when you use the cover stitch hem. But the advantage of using a band, I folded it over there so you can see it, is that we can use 4-thread overlock. And 4-thread overlock is super stretchy. So it's a great way to go on leggings. And it also saves you converting your machine if you don't have a standalone. I've got another t-shirt here that whoops, lost my papers. Another t-shirt here I made using bands, and you can see that it's really a nice contrast. And the bottom, I actually did do a cover stitch hem on that one, but you see on the sleeve band how I added that in, and that works really well for me because I have ever such long arms, and I sometimes think they look too long. So when I put a band around them, it tends to shorten my arm visually. It doesn't actually shorten my arm. So let me see, Richard, do we have any questions so far?
No.
He says no.
Some poor soul's living in a polar vortex, but
Oh, that doesn't sound good. Yes. So yes, I didn't mention weather. Thought I'd miss it out this week since I'm always jealous of everybody's snow. So yes, good to see you all. I hate it when hems curl. Yes, that again, using a band is going to help that. And actually using a band does add weight to it. Now I've got something else to show you when I find it. It's right in front of me, of course. No comments, Richard. Yeah. So here we have this little dress I did for Claire. Not that Claire's ever seen it. But what I did here was I put a band around the bottom. And one of the things I like about that is it adds a bit of weight to it. So let me show you the inside. So you can do bands on sleeves, on skirts, dresses, as long as it's straight. It's not a curved band, you know, curved edge, lower edge. Sleeves generally aren't. So do I have any questions?
no.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you two methods, because I think there's two ways to do it, and I think one way is good for one technique and the other way for the other. Gosh, I made that sound confusing. Right, so let us look at a sleeve hem, okay? I have one here ready to go. So I'm going to give you the stitch settings and everything afterwards, but let me just do this. Let me tell you that I have not put the written file in because it told me it wouldn't take it, but I will put it in later, and you will find it in my group, Deb Canham Serger Sanity Projects, and it's in the files section. And on the computer, the files menu runs across the top, and I think it says, I forget what it says, can't remember, but it says more, and when you click on that you'll see the files. Now I don't think that comes up on the phone, but you'll find the written file in there as soon as I can get it in. It wouldn't go in. So let's look at bands on the bottom of the sleeves. First thing you're going to do is measure your sleeve. I'm actually going to turn you, actually no, I'll show you here. So here's the lower edge of my sleeve. Look, I've got an actual sleeve. So you're going to measure that lower edge and you're going to cut a band out the same width. And I'm going to tell you in a minute what width I actually cut it, because I want to show you the process first. Same size, okay? So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take it to the ironing board, see? And you're going to fold it in half, wrong sides together, and press it really well. And press it flat. And don't pull on it, because when you pull on it, it curls over and causes all sorts of problems. So there I have it. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to open up the band you've just pressed. And I always press my bands before I apply them, before I sew them. It's just easier to press up a flat piece of fabric. So you're going to put the short ends together and you're just going to sew that seam so that you end up with a continuous band. And then you are going to, I'm not going to do that bit, so that's why I showed you that. So there I have my continuous band, and I folded it back over and I pressed it really well, and I used a clapper to flatten the seam. If you like the clapper, Jan Squires, she's bound to be in this video. So you're going to press it, let it dry, and you are ready to attach it to your t-shirt. Now let me just have a quick look, make sure I haven't missed something. Nope, I don't think so. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a quick look for questions, and then I'm going to take you over to the machine and show you the way I sew it.
Do you have the black and white polka dot zipper top to show?
I have the black and white zipper top. Yes, I do. Found it. That's a great one for bands.
Okay.
It's hanging on the bookcase. I couldn't find it when I looked for it just now. It's hanging up on the other side of the room.
It's always hanging on the bookcase.
It's always hanging on the bookcase. Right, this is another one that has bands, and I think it just shows you how nice a contrast can look when you're sewing a t-shirt. So it actually has bands around the sleeves, it has bands across the straight hem, and actually, I'm not going to confuse everybody, but those are also bands that I put a zipper in using flat lock, but I'm not going there tonight. Okay, so
Somebody loved the flower decoration on that little dress you showed.
that little dress I showed, yes, that flower decoration, that's all done with the Baby Lock gathering foot. It's a subject for another day, perhaps.
And the fabric for your t-shirt.
Fabric for my t-shirt, I got this from So English Fabrics. It's a French terry.
French terry.
So.
And someone says, will this work on necklines or for necklines?
No, this will not work on necklines because they're curved. Okay, we're just talking about straight. All right. Okay, so what I want to do now is take you to my other camera on the machine. And one or two of you complained it was a bit bright last week. Too sunshiny on my machine. So I put some black tape over one of the lights. There's too many good lights on this machine. So I hope it works better
and
for you.
Someone says, sorry, love the jacket. What pattern is it? Is there a pattern for that little jacket?
Which little jacket?
Well, I suppose it's...
The black and white t-shirt was just, I took a regular t-shirt pattern and I chopped it up. So that would actually make a really good live, wouldn't it? How I chopped up a dead normal t-shirt pattern and made that. It's quite a fun thing. It's actually featured in my Working with Knits book. I explain how I do it. If not in the book, in a video that goes with the book.
So working with knits, pay attention later on, people.
Yes, working with knits, I've got a deal on that tonight. Right, okay. So let us look at this machine. So I have my band, okay? I don't want to stretch it. And what I'm going to do before I do anything else is I am going to pull this camera out because you're barely seeing anything, are you? Whoops. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew that raw edge together. And why do I do that? Because then when I go to sew my sleeve seam, instead of having 3 raw edges, I have my finished edge and my t-shirt. Now I'm working on a knit. I actually have regular serger needles in my machine, but if I might well have ballpoint or stretch. But what is important is I have my differential feed on 1.3. And what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to pull the stitches off the stitch finger so I can get it in there. I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to make sure that my raw edges are right up to the knife. So they're right up to the knife, and I'm just going to stitch all the way around. If it pulls away from you, lift it and move it over again. And you'll see I'm not cutting anything off, well, I'm not meaning to. I have cut a little fraction off. But my role is just to attach these 2 raw edges. And I've got wrong sides together, so you're seeing the right side. What I'm going to do is, as soon as I overlap, I'm going to come off. Consider this basting. Okay, so now my band is all sewn together, so it's basically complete. And what I have to do is I have to attach it to the sleeve. And Sherry, I'm going to move on to that. That's my 2 options. Okay, don't worry, I'm getting there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sleeve, which I sewed earlier, and I am going to match the bands.
Could you put the band on before you sew the sleeve seam?
Yeah, Richard's saying, somebody asked, can I sew the band on before I sew the sleeve seam? Yes, I can. I'm going to feature that in a minute, okay? So bear with me. There's two different ways to do it, and different times when I'd use different ones. Now, you are always going to get a nicer finish on a t-shirt if you use this method, because if you sew it flat, you're going to have the seam showing, and I'll show you what I mean before I do the next one. And what I'm doing is I have got the t-shirt sleeve on the outside. Do you see that? And I'm just going to put a few pins in it because, and you see I'm pinning my pins so that I'm not going to go over them with the knife, because that's normally tragic. Right. That said, I did this one that way, but I'm pulling it out the way. Okay, so let's get on. So this is the big question, and this is the big tip, and this is the bit I want you to take home with you tonight, which is silly because you are at home. Which is the most vulnerable side of this seam I'm going to sew? Is it the single side, the actual sleeve garment, or is it this double band? Because whichever is the most vulnerable needs to go against the feed dogs. Okay, I do not want to stretch this sleeve. So this single fabric is far more vulnerable than the band. So it's going to go directly against the feed dogs. And I am matching the raw edge of the sleeve to the raw edge of the band. But what I need to do is I need to cut off all the stitches I already have on there. Otherwise, they could show on the right side. Linda, I'm using regular serger thread. Okay, the other thing I want to mention is, you know the seam here? I have this seam going that way, and I have the back seam going the other way. It just makes less bulk. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift my needles. I'm going to pull my thread off my stitch finger, and I'm going to get sewing. But obviously I can't get straight in. I have to drive on. It's like driving onto a road. I have to drive on. I can't just start where I want to. So that's what I'm going to do here. And you know, on the front of your foot you have these notches, and I'm using the 01 needle. That's the notch there. Okay. And but that actually isn't going to help me an awful lot for what I want to do. What I should have said to you is, do you see the knife? What I want to do is I want to make sure that the edge of the knife is cutting off these stitches. Okay, so that's what I'm looking at tonight. I'm not actually going to be looking at my notches, which is unusual for me. So I'm going to drive on, and I've got my knife level with those stitches, so it's cutting the stitches off. And as I said, the reason for this is I don't want the stitches to show on the right side when I turn it right side out. But also it's giving me a guide, so I cut the same amount off all the way through. And you notice that I just stitch an inch maybe, and then I match my edges again, and I'm not stretching anything. Okay, it's the last thing I want to do. I let the feed dogs do their job. Now if when it comes to the end I have a problem, I might have to stretch something to fit, but I don't think I will. I'm not expecting it. Right. So here we are, we're coming back round to where we started, and you see that I sewed on. Now I need to sew across and level out those stitches. Just got to make sure that piece comes up a bit. And I can see where my stitches are and where I need to level it off. And once you've got to that section, if you're nervous of cutting your stitches, you can put your knife down once you've overlapped. I like to leave mine up because it's more exciting. Right. So let me turn that right side out and you will see a band. Jan, no, it wouldn't really work on a neck binding because it really needs to be dead straight. It can't really be curved. But isn't that a nice finish? Okay. And you'll see that the bottom of the sleeve, it's nice, isn't it? You've not got the raw edge of the sleeve shown, which you would have if you'd sewn it flat. Okay. So any questions on that?
Could you put band on before you sew sleeve? You've done that one. Knife down so don't cut material?
Yeah, actually the knife's down so I don't cut the stitches because it tends to make a mess. Okay, I'm not going to cut the material because it's already been cut.
And can you sew the cuff to... Lost it now.
I'm going to bring you back to me for a minute.
Can you sew the cuff to the sleeve all in one step?
Can you sew the cuff to the sleeve all in one step? I just did. But I think you're talking about flat, aren't you? This is when you do it in the round. And this is always going to give you the nicer finish. You see, it's just a nicer finish. And if I turn it over, you can't see any raw edge, can you? Now, if you choose to do it flat, which I actually did with this dress, so let me show you that. So for this hem, I put a band on the bottom. It's a woven, but it's the same principle. But do you see my stitching? I put the band on flat. See, my stitching is there. And it actually potentially could be visible from the right side. I actually stitched it down, so that kind of helped. But if I hadn't, it would stick up and it would be a little bit visible. But there are times when that's fine. And there are times when you have no option. So say you're working on a children's sleeve. Trust me, a young child, you will not be able to sew the cuff on in the round. There just isn't enough room in there. So what you're going to do is you're going to sew it flat. And I certainly have sewn t-shirts with flat things. It's not my favorite, but you know, you never know what situation you're in. So what I want to do now is I just want to tell you how I do that one. Oh, I know what I didn't tell you. I didn't tell you how I cut out that band. So the basic band on this black and white one was, I aimed it to be 1 inch. So I cut out 2 inches. Okay, 2 inches wide. Then I added to it 1/2 inch to each end. And that was because I sewed around it once. That took up a good 1/4 inch. Then I sewed around it again, so that took up another 1/4 inch. So when you're doing something like this, you need to add, let me think, 1 inch to your height, okay? But when you're doing it flat, we're not going to do it quite the same way. And I'm actually going to use a woven, so I'm going to go back, differential feed back to normal. I'm going to make sure my knife is back up. And I'm just going to go straight in and show you. So here I have it. It's flat. There's my band. I am using a woven. It's actually hard to do this method with knit really well. And because I'm demoing it, I didn't want to make it look difficult. But it can be done with knit. But I folded my cotton band. Here's my sleeve. You know, I ask you to be creative and imaginative. That is a sleeve. Right, so I'm going to sew one to the other. And this time round, I'm not going to sew round here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn the camera around and show you. So because it's flat, it's not so difficult in some ways, but there's a reason why I'm doing it this way. And let me just sew it and then show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to match the raw edges up. Whoops. And I am going to put my, you know me, I'm going to feed it in as much as I can, get all those feed dogs in, so I put it right back to the needles virtually. And I am going to sew this band on, and I am going to cut nothing off. I am actually going to use my knife as a guide, and I'm going to run the raw edge along the knife. I could also have used my lace applicator foot, but I'm actually going to use the knife. Right, off we go. Now I spend a lot of my time serging where I don't cut, okay? A lot of my time. I cut on things like rolled hems because that's the right thing to do. But 9 times out of 10, if I'm sewing something, I don't cut. I just use the knife as a guide. So I could probably do this blindfold. That was a joke. I couldn't, but you know, almost. It's just natural to me. And I suggest all of you work on that. And this is the reason why. Okay, you have to be really accurate because now you're going to sew this end to this end, right? And if you have cut some off, it's very easy to cut too much off or not enough off. But when I cut the band perfectly and then I sew it using the knife as a guide, do you see how perfect that is? Let me just hope I can sew it. Right, so here's my folded edge here. This came up actually in one of the things today. Right up to the needles. Okay, I'm going to put my needles down. I'm going to put it right up to my needles. And I am going to have the raw edge against the knife. And that way I've got all those feed dogs guiding this. So trust me, it's going to go nowhere. You know how some people say, oh, it moves. Well, it only moves if you don't give it all the feed dogs. So the advantage of using this method is it's just more accurate. See how perfect is that? Phew. See, it was perfect both sides. So just remember that. If I had sewn round it once and then sewn round it again, it's just hard to be accurate. It's just the wrong technique for this method. But you see how perfectly it matches. If you want to be really accurate, use the knife as a guide or use the lace applicator foot. And you can see here that the stitching does show. Of course, it would look better in matching thread. And what I would do is thread that up and thread it through, and that would be that. And then if I could see it and it annoyed me, which it would, I would just stitch it down. Right. Would you show how to tuck the starter tail? I won't tonight, but I will another night for sure. Okay, so bring you back round to me. Any big questions?
Will it fray at edge? Soon fray?
It will come undone if you cut it. You need to feed in that thread chain, okay?
Would you show how to tuck the starter tail?
Yeah, I'm not going to do that tonight. Can you sew a cotton band to a knit dress? Do you need to do anything special different? You know, you certainly could. I would say this. Which is the most vulnerable? If it's a knit, the knit needs to go down and the band on top. But you have to be very careful about using differential feed because it will gather up and you could end up with pleats. So I would try it, but there's no reason why you couldn't. Okay, so I hope that helped you. I absolutely love bands. I think they look good, they're easy, they're quick. What is there not to love?